Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Performance and Finance Scrutiny for the 4th of September. Eddie, have we got any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor David O'Mahony, Councillor Rob Lee is subbing for him, Councillor Victoria Wheeler and Councillor Pat Tedder is subbing for her, and Councillor Nirmal Kang is joining online for this meeting.
Thank you. Okay, next item, minutes of previous meeting. Any matters arising from previous minutes? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Under the work programme section of the meeting in March, I requested that we have a review of the car park financial performance, progress on renovations since the increases, what would have been April now, 6 months on, which I think we agreed in that meeting would be for November. I've noticed it's not on these minutes and it's also not included in the work programme, so would it be possible to get that amended, please?
Thank you. I do remember the conversation. Is that something we can add to the work programme?
Yeah, I will review it and make sure I'll review the minutes and make sure it's
Brilliant.
added to the minutes.
Thank you. Any other matters? Councillor Rowlands.
Yes, Chairman. I know this is coming up later on, but there is mention of homelessness and what the authority is doing on that. Just to say that with the Frimley Fuel Allotments charity, I visited Frimhurst, which is a big estate in Frimley Green, and they're building new premises and are particularly interested in working with the authority in this area. And I know that the housing department have already went out, I think, yesterday to talk to them about it. But I thought I'd mention it as it came up within the context of the report, a report that came up on homelessness, and in that way. So it's a positive, very positive step, because I think there is some difficulty where there are homeless families finding suitable places for them. And this is, I think, something that could really be exploited and developed.
Thank you. I'm guessing that's not specifically related to the minutes and is not actually related to an item, although we are talking about homeless. Is that something we can take away and bring up with the relevant officers? Thank you. Any other minutes, matters arising? No? Okay. Thank you. So I'll just sign those. I won't sign them because we need to make the relevant adjustments. Okay, so that takes us on to item number 3, declarations of interests. Have we got any declarations of interest? It looks like there are no declarations of interest, so that takes us to number 4, which I believe we have no public questions.
No.
Okay, so brings us to item number 5, which is the complaints monitoring and report, which I believe Mr. Watson is going to present.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. And can I say thank you to Councillor Wilson, who sent me through a list of potential corrections and typos. I'll go through those first, if you don't mind, and answer your questions. So it saves you having to burn your questions up on something you've already done. I think the typos are down to me trying to be flash with track changes and my officer not managing to pick them up right. So it's one of those things. So I'll go through the typos first, if people don't mind. And the first one is on page 11 in paragraph 1.1. And it's the third line of that paragraph where it says complaints received and complaints taken to the received by the, if you delete received by the, then it just says complaints taken to the local government and social care ombudsman. I'm going to try and stop saying ombudsman throughout the meeting because I can't say it properly anyway. The next one was on page 12 and it's in paragraph 1.5 and it's in the last line that says escalated to stage 3 counts, and it should be as 2 of this number. So again, just missing out the S on that one. The next one was a question point made by Councillor Wilson. At the top of the table in paragraph 1.9 on page 13, it has private sector housing, stage 1 is 1 and stage 3 is 2. And the question is, why is it a bigger number at stage 3? It could be one of two reasons, and I'll need to check back with my manager, who's currently in Corfu, so I'm not going to nip out and see her, unfortunately. But it could be because it was a stage 3 from the previous year that had been a stage 2 and had gone to a stage 3 in there. Or it can be, in some instances, we will escalate, bypass stage 2 and straight into stage 3 if it's requested by the complainant, if they feel that they also want to escalate the process. Of course, this is now a moot point because we no longer have stage 3 in our complaints process, and that would be reflected in the 24-25 report that will come around about this time next year. The next one was page 15 and paragraph 1.4, which is refer back to Surrey Heath for local resolution, and then it seems to say it again with 1, refer back for local resolution. This is basically a cut and paste from the LGSCO's website, and I think refer back to Surrey Heath for local resolution is either from a previous part of the website we did the cut and paste, or it's a title line. So if you just put a red line or a line through refer back to Surrey Heath for local resolution at the top, it will then tally up to the 8 that was in there. The next one is page 18, and the table shows that Surrey Heath received 7 complaints, but the table on page 19 says 8, and so on like that. I think the issue there is the understanding between the LGO. Again, this is an extract from the LGO, and it's sort of both of these tables are exactly from their sheet that they send through to us. I think the reason why it's 7 is because they don't count the one they referred back to us as one they dealt with in that situation there. And it does say also in the, again, on page 18, second tab, and you make the point quite rightly, there's no second tab there. Again, this has come from the LGO's website. So I'll see if I can find a second tab, and if need be, if it's relevant, share it. But that's the reason why it's a straight snapshot as opposed to a replica of it. So at that point, I'll go on to the report in general now. The report is one we bring annually to this committee, shows where we are. It does show a slight improvement in the number of complaints we've had, and certainly an improvement in our speed of triage, and again, the amounts that get escalated through to the LGO. It is the one, sad case that we did have one where it was found against the council, and that was partly to do with an issue with one of our third-party contractors that we've now resolved around it. The actual incident was not challenged. It was more the fact we didn't have a process in the third-party operative that matched ours. They now match up and tie in. So that's where we are on that one. It does mention here that we've now moved to a new 2-stage process in accordance with the LGSCO's guidance around where we go to, which actually speed things up, and we now have probably our lowest number of outstanding complaints, and all those that we currently have are still, I suppose in inverted commas, live in that they're within the timescales that we've got. I'm now happy to take questions where I can. I may have to refer back to my manager and therefore take notes away if you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I'm going to do something I've been accused of as being chair's prerogative being mine. I'm sure I heard it somewhere else first, but my question relates to, and we did mention it briefly within the chair's briefing, but I think it's something I still would like to try and push the point on. So page 18, which is the Ombudsman report. So it's obviously got all the boroughs there, but it's also got county there. And the figure that I want to pick down on and want to find out if we can get by some means is the Education and Children's Services. SEN is certainly something that's quite rife at the moment with issues with residents. I know it's certainly something I get in my inbox a lot. So I'd be really interested to see what the number for Surrey County Council 230 relates back to Surrey Heath. So how many of that 230 relate back to Surrey Heath? And I know it's not specifically something under our remit, but it's in this figure, and certainly education and children's services is an issue. As councillors, I'm sure many of us have had issues in our inbox. So I would like to possibly get a breakdown on that if possible, and I don't know if that's something we can obtain. I will ask the question. Okay, so with that being said, open to any questions. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Mr Watson for going through all these points that I've brought up. I'm sorry for being so picky on some of the typos. But you said there wasn't any second tab, but there is a link at the bottom of the table to the LGSCO's data. And so it was possible to get into all that and see the whole data for multiple years and for all councils and in an Excel spreadsheet to play with. So it was possible to see all that and to compare it. And as you say, there's been an improvement. Last year, there were 14 from Surrey Heath on that table that had been referred to the Ombudsman, and now there's only 7, so 50% improvement. So that's great to see. And obviously comparing it to Surrey County Council, has just been mentioned, they had a 50% increase in complaints and now have the highest level of complaints of any council in the whole country, both in total and on education. So I agree with the point about we need to try and find out how that's affecting our residents as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any other questions? No more. You did such a good job. I'm going to ask another one. Page 12, I think I asked for a bit of clarity when we had the chair's briefing. So it's 1.7. Calls into contact centre revenues and benefits numbered 51,000 for the same period. Interactions across email, web and face-to-face continue to rise, account for 11,450. In 2022-23, this number was 10,000, but we haven't got the same figure for those calls going into the contact centre. So it'll be really interesting to see how that number compares, because obviously the numbers of contacts face-to-face have gone down. So it'll be interesting just to see how those figures compare. If that's something we can get, that can be sent out in an email afterwards. It doesn't, because I know you probably won't know tonight.
Top of my head, no, I don't know. I will get the figure for you there. I believe that in terms of the total number of interactions, we haven't seen too much more, but we are seeing a few more face-to-face this year. And back to your previous one, I will endeavour to see if we can find out on the county, well, the split down by area. They may not have that split, but I'd hope they would. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Right, so no more questions. Oh, sorry, online. I couldn't see that. Sorry, Councillor Kang, couldn't see your hand up. Fire away.
Sorry, can you hear me, Chair?
Certainly can, loud and clear.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Bob, for providing all the information. Now, it was on page 17, 9.4. I understand that LGSO can levy a fine. Has Surrey Heath, in your knowledge, ever been fined, and what are the potential fines that LGSCO can do?
Thank you, Councillor Khan, and thank you, Chair. Yes, it's not so much a fine that they fine us for as a punishment. It's more of a reparation to the individual complainant. We did have one, not this year, but last year, which was a planning issue, and they decreed that we should pay them, I think it was about £800, which is what the only one I know in our thing. They generally don't like to fine local authorities because it is taxpayers' money, but they will if they feel that there is a case for reparations to the individual complainant, make that award. I don't know how whether there's a cap on it or not, but I think they tend to be fairly reasonable because a lot of these are low level in terms of cost complaints. So when they do award compensation, it's very rarely. It's normally a refund of something that an individual's paid and we haven't processed in adequate time, probably.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, sorry, I'll just based on that question, if there's a fine, say planning, does that come out of planning's budget, or is it come out somewhere else?
There is no budget set aside in the council centrally to cover off LGSCO's fines, so it would be a charge to the service area that is fined. But normally, if it's a refund of fees or something like that, we've had the income in anyway. So we just haven't had the income, but we've done the work eventually free of charge.
So I think Councillor Lee first and then Councillor Wilson.
It looks like I'm Lewis Mears on this button. Let me try the other one.
Is that better?
Oh, I'm Rob Lee. The buttons are backwards. Observation obviously around adult social care. That's into double figures for complaints for Surrey County Council as well. And I know there's 28 in relation to highways and transport, which is obviously an issue to many residents in the borough. Obviously, the clear anecdotal evidence from the number of cars quite severely damaged. I just wondered, when someone's car gets severely damaged by potholes and things, do they ultimately make it into this process, or are we straying into Surrey County Council's area?
I will let one of you speak, but I'm guessing that's County Council's area, but over to you, Mr Watson.
Yes, it is Surrey County Council area. We won't get in there. I do know, having worked previously at unitary authorities, if someone has a pothole damage, the council will either accept it as a valid claim or will reject it, normally using the Section 52 defence that they weren't aware of the potholes and they've got a regime in place for maintaining and checking the roads. So that normally gets resolved through an insurance process. And you can also appeal the fact that the decision not to pay the insurance claim can be done. It may then escalate into a complaint, but only once it's exhausted that insurance process. They may say, I don't feel you dealt with my claim properly and therefore wish to make it a formal complaint through the complaints process. So it could end up in it, but I don't know what the transition rate is, depending on how well county pay claims.
So you have to go through quite a few processes to get to the level of actually making a complaint then. It's not something that happens lightly where a resident says, I'm going to make a complaint.
They could do, but it's likely to then get referred back by the LGSO to say, have you been through the claims policy process? So they have to go on the website, fill out a claim form, identify the pothole, know what its name was, prove it's deeper than a 50p piece, and so on and so on and so on. As you see, I've done insurance around potholes before.
Your insight and background knowledge is gratefully appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly to back up Mr Watson's answer to Councillor Kang on financial redress, not fines that councils have to pay potentially due to complaints. Surrey County Council just published their papers for their audit and governance committee, I think it was today or yesterday, and in the year that we're talking about here, they paid over £540,000 in financial redress, some of it due to their local procedures and some of it they were ordered to by the Ombudsman. So maybe that kind of puts in perspective the fact that this council paid nothing in that year. So I think that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Assuming there's no more questions, let's go on to... Thank you, Mr Watson. And thank your team for putting the report together as well. And I hope they're having a lovely time in Corfu. Right, item number 6. So end of year performance report, please.
Good evening, Chair. I think that one's mine, if that's okay. And I'm really happy to give you a bit of an introduction to this one. So the annual plan is our key performance measurement from which we take our objectives for officers across the council. And you can see from the report that we have reached a good level of completion this year, but some of the projects are still in progress. This annual plan reflects the council performance from April 2023 to March 2024, and unfortunately, due to the election, this is slightly back to front because usually it comes to P&F before it goes to executive, but on this occasion, due to the election, it has already been to the executive first. We've tried a new format this year. We took into account lots of feedback from last year. And one of the things we're trying to do is to be much more visible and have the report easier to read and more accessible to residents. Just for the committee's noting, we're also intending to produce a sort of a short guide for residents that we will be publishing on our website. And we will be circulating that to the committee after this meeting so that they can see what that says and what that looks like. We'd be very grateful for any feedback around how the report looks. As well as the annual plan last year, of course, in this report, it details that we also delivered the short-term plan. And in addition to that, we had a number of other action plans, including the Peer Challenge Action Plan. I'd like to take this opportunity, Chair, to thank you and also Councillor Wilson for questions prior to this meeting. I believe that Democratic Services circulated some draft answers to those questions, but I'd be welcome discussing those in more detail, and of course welcome the scrutiny of the committee, and happy to answer any questions or equally share detailed operational questions out amongst my senior colleagues who are responsible for the delivery. Thank you very much, and as I say, we welcome questions.
Thank you, Ms Kipping, and thank you, Ms Bainbridge. I know you're online as well. I'm going to do this at the beginning because I always end up forgetting. Thank you, guys, for pulling the report together. I would like to say, and I did say it at the Chair's briefing, the beginning of the report, the graphics are very, very good, very, very helpful. So I certainly thank you for that. And the report as a whole, obviously, very, very easy to read, with lots of stats. I personally have got a whole pile of questions, and I don't intend on asking them all tonight. I will happily send them afterwards. But I'm going to give over to the floor first to see if we've got any other questions out there first. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the officers for producing the report and for getting back to me so quickly with all of my points on it. One of the points which I want to make in public is I think that the KPIs section of the report is a really great new development. I know it's the first year you've done it, and it would be great for the public to have more exposure to that, to see how the council is doing against its plans. If I can, I just want to go into one, because I know I take the point about how this report was written to be as at the 31st of March this year, and we're now 5+ months on from that. So looking at, on page 44, ENV 01B, the playground replacement at Whitmore Road, I think this is actually the position at the 31st of March. And it says that the council are actively negotiating the transfer agreement, which is in its final stages. So that suggests, if that was the case 5 months ago, it's really in its very final stages now. So since it's going to be imminent, that the land, hopefully the land transfers, and then looking back to when we did the expedited the case for the Albert Road playground refurbishment, again in the same area that's affected by the loss of the M3 bridge, there was a period where there was tendering for the contract for the playground equipment and the new design, and then there was a consultation period with the public. Is it worth starting that tendering design and consultation period now in anticipation of the imminent land transfer? I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And you beat me to it because Councillor White mentioned it to me as well, as I'm sure he's been chasing it as well. Who wants to take that? Mr Stevens.
This is very odd being the chair.
They got my face as well.
So you look wonderful.
Just for anybody watching online, this is not me speaking. This is Mr. Stevens.
So hot off the press, there is an update that we received today from Surrey County Council. So we are literally on the brink of agreeing the lease. We've been pushing hard and we're grateful for the leader of this council chasing the leader of Surrey County Council to expedite that. It has been a long and protracted process. Yes, it's a very good point, Councillor Wilson. We are very keen to start as soon as humanly possible. So I'll speak to Ms McCubbin about getting that consultation kicked off as soon as humanly possible.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Right, any other questions, councillors? Councillor Rowlands.
Comment here about 25% success. How does
What
that
page are we talking about?
Item 1.5, and it's on page 22. Yeah, I'm just wondering about 25%. How does that compare with previous years as a rate of success?
Sally, can you hear? Did you hear that one?
Apologies, I didn't hear that at all. I heard success, but I didn't.
Okay, success was a good one. Page 22, 1.5, 25%. How does that compare to previous years? That was from Councillor Rowlands.
22. Sorry, let me just get there. Can I take that question away and send a written response? Would that be okay?
Yeah, fine.
That'll be fine, thank you.
These are just comments of, obviously, well done on recycling. That shows, seems a very positive result, if I'm reading it correctly. I just wondered about the street cleaning results. How does they compare with previous years?
Is there a specific page? I'm being told 31.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. The truth is, off the top of my head, I don't know, but what I can confirm is that we are performing consistently well year on year in relation to street sweeping, and the litter and detritus surveys demonstrate that quite consistently. I will revert to Joint Waste Solutions and come back to you collectively with an answer.
And just a well done to the museum, which seems to have done particularly well.
Thank you. Yeah, I had that down as a thank you as well. So thank you to that. If we can pass on that to the team. Actually, whilst I'm thinking about street cleaning, not specifically street cleaning, but it's not on this list, and it's just one that's come into my inbox literally in the last week, is green spaces bins not being emptied. Specifically a bin that we both know about that's repeatedly not emptied. That doesn't appear to be in any of these stats here. Is that because we don't keep them, or it's just something we just don't put on the annual report? And I don't know if you want to...
I can take that. It's certainly something we can look into. So as you are aware, we have street bins and then we have parks bins. This data relates to the street bins. We can look to try and find comparable data for the Glendale contract and the parks bins, if that would assist. And we can speak to our colleagues in green spaces to facilitate that.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure, and I don't know what other people's inboxes are like, but I certainly get regularly people telling me about green spaces bins that haven't been emptied. So I'm guessing, is that something that, so I'm getting some nods from other people. So yeah, it might be worth looking at that for future, even if we can bring something back for this, but if not, I get that, but it might be worth looking at for future reports, if that's okay. Okay, suddenly I got three, so I think it was Councillor Lee, Councillor Mears and then Councillor Noble.
We could be here a while. On page 28,
Can I suggest if you've got a list that you do a few and we'll come back and we'll spread the load?
I think that sounds a very kind
Brilliant.
idea. I
Thank
agree.
you.
On page 28, it's got 22, 23. Do we have 23, 24? For the household waste recycled and the residual waste? Or does it normally lag a year behind? The couple of the graphs seem to straddle 2 years. I presume that the previous year is in a different colour.
Is that specifically...
32 as an example. So it's particularly small print, and I've literally only just seen it this evening, so forgive me. People attending events in Camberley Theatre, obviously positive to see an increase. It's an important local asset, but what impact could the closure, for obviously the awful rack inside it, have on that for the coming year? It's good to see that the number of days taken to process changes in circumstances of benefit claims are kind of in a positive space. I just wondered in terms of targets missed for days taken to process new housing benefit claims. Perhaps some background around that.
Do you want to stop there?
I'm happy to stop
Marvellous.
there, Chair.
I will come. I promise I'll come back to you. Do we want to take whoever wants to take some of those straight away? And Mr. Stevens has got his hand up, or it's Kipping. Who wants to go first?
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Thank you, Ms Kipping. So, taking those in order, in terms of the lag, yes, there is a lag in terms of the data that we get for waste predominantly, and that's because most of it needs to be validated through DEFRA. So we have background data that we provide so we can give an indication of where we think we will be, but it needs to be validated generally before we publish it, just to ensure that it is entirely accurate, and also takes account of other waste streams like litter picking and street bins and so on and so forth. Moving on to the next one, there was a question about colours on a subsequent page. You are right, so if we're using page 32 as an example, there is a very small descriptor at the bottom that depicts, I've lost audio, there we are, the individual years. So green would be the 23-24 year, and the grey would be the 22-23 financial year. In terms of Camberley Theatre and the impact on the coming year due to the closure of RAC, we sincerely hope there won't be an impact. We have ensured that we've got quite a busy and varied calendar from the point of reopening, starting with the pantomime and then continuing through into the new calendar year. Ticket sales, from my understanding, are already very positive, and we hope that we can pick up where we left off before we closed. The last question was in relation to benefits claims, and I'd be looking, and Mr Watson's eagerly waving, I'd be looking for Mr Watson to respond to that one.
Thank you, Stevens, Chair, Councillor Lee. This is going to hopefully keep the people who like statistics happy as well. What happened in the last year or so is that DWP have taken over processing some of the housing benefit claims for people at working age, leaving the council with the pension age credits and some of the more difficult working age ones. That means we are still having to spend a long time, taking a long time to get the claims right, because they are more complicated and require more investigation and bringing more information into the claims assessors. Generally, we would, and this is the statistics bit, try and do some very quick claims and some long-term claims to try and keep our average at a decent level. Because all the very quick claims are now being done by DWP, we haven't got those ones to bring the average down. So it actually is impacting on the statistical amount of time spent to do the claim. So we're not processing any slower, we just haven't got any quick wins to even out the stats. We are looking to readjust that number in there. What we do keep a very close eye on is the threshold for DWP intervention is 30 days. And we're very keen to make sure we don't get close to that. We work very closely with our DWP overseer who sort of looks where we go. They're very happy with our level of performance. We are potentially, again, well within the tolerances of DWP and a lot better than some other councils. But I haven't got the comparative data, so before you ask the question, I'm sure you would. I can try and find out some comparative data, but those that aren't very good don't tend to shout about it. But that's where we are. We are processing it and we are trying to get better, but it's obviously, without putting a great deal more resource into it and asking for a bigger team, I can't do much other than just accept that the statistical average is going up.
Ms Kipping, did you want to come in on any of the other points?
No, I'm fine. I think Mr. Stevens covered it off beautifully.
In which case, I'm going to mention, because the theatre was mentioned, it was one on my list anyway, so I'm going to do Chair's prerogative. Just to say, I know there was a point in here about the theatre website, and there was a question about the theatre website as well. I believe it's now up and running, or not all of it necessarily, I think, but it's at least partially up and running, and I know that for a fact because I got an email telling me it's up and running, and I looked at it and it looks 1,000 times better than the old website did, and it doesn't look as clunky, and I will look forward to ordering my Panto tickets on it. Did you want to say anything on that actually while we're talking about the website?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that prompt. We are incredibly proud of the new theatre website, and it's been getting really good feedback, even though it's only been up and running for a couple of weeks. Our ICT team worked very hard with officers from the theatre to produce a really modern website, and it's very much more accessible than the old website. So as well as being faster, you know, more efficient and all that sort of thing, I think it really will serve residents really well. So we're really hopeful that that will, you know, even with the difficult times that the theatre is going through, that will really boost theatre numbers and make it give it that sort of fresher portal and more modern feel that people are looking for, and bring people into Camberley as a result. So fingers crossed, very early days, but the theatre website is looking good.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to go to Councillor Mears, then Councillor Noble, then I'll go back to Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. On page 53, the dry mixed recycling contamination has been a bit up and down. I know that we can't stand there in people's kitchens as they're sorting their rubbish out, but we can educate and campaign to make sure that we can get that number down. I'm interested in what we're doing on that front.
Thank you. Is that going to be you as well, Mr. Stevens, unless someone else wants? Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Mears. So we are a member of Surrey Environment Partnership. They manage a lot of the comms and the promotions around recycling and waste reduction on our behalf, as they do for the other 10 districts and boroughs and for Surrey County Council as well. And it is an absolute priority for us to reduce the quantum of residual waste, reduce contamination of our dry mixed recycling, and encourage every single means of recycling and waste reduction we possibly can. There are a large number of campaigns that are taking place in conjunction with County, in conjunction with our contractor Amy, through Surrey Environment Partnership. I believe that what we are focusing on later this year is planned interventions, including letter drops. So what we're doing is we're analysing where we're having contamination of dry mixed recyclate. We're trying to drill down to a geographical location, so a ward or smaller, and actually doing letter drops within those locations to try and influence a change. And that's one of a number of things that we're doing by way of initiatives. I'm trying to think of the actual title of the other one, but it escapes me. So if you're happy for me to do so, I will send you details by email.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. During the Vice Chair and Chair's briefing recently, I asked some questions regarding page 37-38 of the report about the temporary accommodation and housing approaches. So thank you, Eddie, for organising the responses. Thank you to Clive and Lindsay for those responses. But just for the purposes of the committee here, the questions I asked was on page 38, what's the breakdown of the 1,069? How many, i.e. how many are requiring emergency housing? How many receiving basic advice? and Clive has responded that it's not possible to break this down, but figures are collated separately, and a detailed breakdown will come to the November meeting. I also asked whether the upward curve was likely to continue, and the response was yes, it's expected to continue. I asked what the cause of the homeless prevented figures decreasing year on year, whilst the total approaches have increased year on year on page 37, and the response was that it's been increasingly difficult to prevent residents from becoming homeless due to several factors, including the lack of affordable accommodation in the private rented sector and private landlords exiting the market. And then lastly, I asked what effect the Landlord and Tenant Act has had on the above, and Clive has referred back to the Renters' Rights Bill, previously the Renter Reform Bill. Whilst it's not enacted, one of the reasons landlords are exiting the market is a worry over the end of the Section 21 evictions. And when legislation is enacted, there will be new burdens on the council in terms of housing enforcement. So we're hoping for more clarity later in the year, and again that will come to PNF in November.
Thank you. And what I'm going to suggest is, I know there's some questions that Councillor Wilson sent, and obviously you did, and I'm going to probably not get through all mine. Maybe if we can then send an email out afterwards, Eddie, with all the answers. Yeah, marvellous. Thank you. Was that the last of yours, Councillor Noble? Right. Councillor Lee, did you want to come back with some of yours? And then if anyone else, and I've got some myself as well, but if anyone else, so I've got Wilson, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Rowland.
It's a very popular item, Chair. Well done.
The annual plan is always a popular item.
So page 47, EV charge points. It's obviously one of those issues that's quite good for the environment, but somewhat frustrating for us at the slow progress of that. I don't know if there's a further update on that. My understanding is we didn't pay for them, which I guess is part of the frustration in terms of the control. You can't really withhold money. I noticed there was some reference to some legal issues as well. I don't know what the background to that is. Then Councillor Lewis beat me to the dry mix recycling I've marked up here. Well done, sir.
Thanks.
And then poo bins seem to have made a recent resurgence. So looking at page 52, it was interesting to see percentage of streets falling below a grade B cleaning standard around litter, which I thought was actually jumped out to me as remarkably low, and perhaps a piece of praise there for hard-working officers at the coalface, because I know with a lot of these things you tend to hear about the negatives, and it must be quite difficult for officers at the coalface when they do hear quite a few of those. But I think, praise where praise is due in terms of doing a good job and potentially smashing it out the park. I'm not an expert, so perhaps use that phraseology lightly. That's the last of mine.
Thank you. And yeah, I'd pick up on that point. It says 4%, doesn't it? And we're at 0.38. So that's a long way away from what the target is, which is good. Did you want to come back on any of those?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Yeah, I will make sure that the thanks are passed on to those at the depot that are responsible for making sure our streets are as clean as they possibly can be. And it is reassuring that we are successfully and unsuccessfully passing the litter and detritus survey tests that are being done. In relation to the EV chargers, the latest I can give you is that the last two sites, Bagshot and Chobham, will have works to bring in the electrical supply on the 16th of September, so not too far away. And during this time, whilst there will be some disruption, the car parks will still be accessible. Those are the last two, which will be live within the next month, which is reassuring. It has taken a great deal of time, and it has been a world of pain for the officers involved in this, and I appreciate your patience whilst we've been waiting to get these going live. We are thankful that we didn't pay for this, and if we had it done, clearly we would have been a lot more robust over the timescales. But thankfully it's through government funding, through AUX funding, and obviously through the provider paying for the installation costs as well.
Yeah, and again, thank you. I guess there's no chance of our officers' time being clawed back for managing their mismanagement.
Unfortunately not, but certainly there are lessons learned. We know that we have the Orcs funding only related to open-air car parks because it's meant to be for on-street provision. It doesn't relate to multi-stories. So we are looking at the multi-stories and the charging provision in those. We would look very hard and long at whether or not we used our existing partner.
I think you're right. My other observation on those was a friend of mine said it could take over a day to charge their car at them, so they've not got very much oomph in them either, which I think is perhaps a frustration. I appreciate it's not necessarily our decision, but it's just an observation when we look forward to the future.
Indeed, and just to come back on that, one of the requirements of the Orcs funding was that they would be 7 kilowatt, with the intention of them being used for residents and people who wanted to charge at a slower rate and not incur a penalty for overstaying their charging period. With the multi-storey car parks clearly being a town centre use, we'd be looking at faster chargers.
Okay, so Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Rowlands, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a question about something else, but just to come back, did the Chief Executive just say that the EV chargers in Bagshot will be operational to the public within the next month? So that would be by the 4th of October?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Make sure you get the date right, because it's going to be on video.
I am deeply apprehensive to give you a clear date, given the experiences we've had so far. You'll appreciate this has been a year and a half to get to this point, and there is still work to do. So I wouldn't want to commit to the 4th of October, but I will give you the most current date we've been provided by Connected Care.
Yeah, no problem. It's just an aside because I've been chasing Bagshot one up, and the latest estimate I had was mid-October. So that's why I was a little bit surprised. But the question I want to ask is on page 41, and it's probably for Mr. Watson, about council tax collection stats. So yeah, obviously these are really good, and it's really important that the council collects as much council tax as possible. I was wondering about the procedure for empty properties, because I know we changed a lot in line with government procedures that we're allowed to do. We changed the council tax that's charged on empty properties to be more punitive after it's empty for, I think, a year. So I've noticed that there's quite a lot of empty properties in my ward as I walk around and knock on every door. Quite a few of them appear to have been empty for quite a long time. I just wondered if there's a robust procedure for identifying properties that become empty to make sure that they can be billed for council tax. And I know I've mentioned it before, but the council tax base only increased by 136 for this year, this current financial year. That's Band E equivalent properties. But a lot of the planning reports say we're building, or 400 houses are being built in the borough every year, but only 136 new households have appeared. So I was just wondering what the procedure is. Is it robust for properties that become empty? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I would say the process is robust. There is always a difference between what the planning authority of the council makes available in terms of land for development and what the developers actually build and then stick a front door on. And the key about a front door is that whilst there's no front door, it's not liable for council tax. Basically, it's not occupied. And they will put the front door on the minute before the individuals then move into the property, so the individuals become liable for council tax. What people are supposed to do if they vacate a property is obviously contact us and tell us that the property is no longer being occupied. They normally are quite good at doing that because they feel that they're going to then not pay any council tax on it until we then move along and bang them with the empty homes premium. So that's that process followed there. We rely on the developers and particularly our building control surveyors who go around and sign off properties for occupation and let us know that they're on there. So they tell my team on revenues, and we have what we class as our visiting officer who goes round, who works very closely with the major developers. And to be fair, they're quite honest with us and say, yes, these are now coming online, what we will do. The process is then followed that we will give a temporary assessment by ourselves of the properties coming online. And so that means no one's building up massive arrears, and they'll get passed across to the valuations office, who actually will set a tax banding and valuation on that property, which means that we're normally quite good at getting the same grading there. Our officers are very experienced, so people don't have arrears suddenly built up when the VOA actually gives the official banding to it. And again, they will get told either by us or by the developer that a property comes online. So we are good. But if you feel there may be some empty properties, if you can drop me a note of where they are, I will ask our visiting officers to go out and visit.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really what I was getting at. Properties that have been occupied then become vacant, and they might be overgrown, or they might just all be shuttered up. And I was just wondering if there's any way that the eventual owner can avoid paying council tax. Can they say it's pending demolition, or it's vacant for some other reason?
Residents can apply to have their property taken out of rating for reasons of it not being occupied. That could be temporary. Say, for example, it's been flooded and they've had to move out into temporary accommodation whilst it's flooded. Or, as you say, it might be in such a state of disrepair it's not habitable. In fact, it could be that our building control go for safety reasons and say it's not habitable. But that would be by them applying to the VOA in order to get it taken out of ratings. We can't take things out of ratings. We can grant relief and exemptions, but it's very rare. We'll do it for just not being occupied unless there's a valid reason that fits in there. We just suggest they go to the VOA, who will either do it temporarily or permanently. But if it then gets reoccupied, we'll then apply a temporary rating and ask the VOA to put it back on the list.
Okay, that's great, and thank you for the offer of taking my list of empty properties. I'll be looking out for them. Thank you.
Maybe the answer is to take the door off again. Take the front door off again. Councillor Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair. The sections on homelessness in the borough are still quite worrying. And the last figure that's quoted here is 1,069. And still the proven difficulty of finding and dealing with this problem. Councillor Whitcroft and I can remember when, under the dominance of the Conservative group, we thought we were out of homelessness, housing completely. But in fact, increasingly we're finding that we have to be proactive, and it is a major issue, I think, facing the council. People struggling in this way, and finding provision for them. And I mentioned a hopeful sign that's come up in the last week or so that may help with the problem. And I, welcome thoughts on that and how to proceed. There's a mention of Doman Road. What's the plans as far as that particular area on the industrial estate is concerned? I wasn't quite clear. Now, we have in the past dealt with the council's attitude to the youth programme that seems to have been tucked away to some extent and partially hidden. I'd be interested to see what exactly our thoughts are on youth policy and what we're proposing to do. It seems to have been lost rather in our plans for the future. Although at one time we did actually have some good ideas of going forward on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I think the housing one we've discussed, and the questions that were asked will come out, the answers will come out anyway. Doman Road, Mr. Stevens, is that something you can pick up on?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. I think that the reference to Doman Road in here is in relation to our discussions with Surrey County Council about a joint approach to the depot, so expanding it so it can be utilised by more local authorities for bulking, ready for either disposal or recycling. Those conversations are ongoing, and they're now being led by the Property and Economic Development team on our behalf. We anticipate that we should have something by way of a recommendation by the end of the calendar year. And that's as much as I can give you on that, but at the moment the conversation is around a provision of a large depot.
And the question about youth, is that, I don't remember. Oh, hello.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that as Head of Service for Community Development. So we don't have specific policies looking at specific ages of residents. So we don't have as such an all-encompassing youth policy at the moment. And that might be something to think about for next year's annual plan if that is seen as important. But we do quite a lot of work with younger people around the council. So one of the things the council will know we reintroduced last year was the Youth Council, and we've been working on that since it was reintroduced. It is active at the moment. We are looking to expand that scheme, and in fact the chair will know that he's had an email conversation with Ms France about involving other schools in that. We've also done a number of pieces of work individually that have worked with schools. It is quite difficult to get into schools, and it's always really, really useful when a councillor has a link with the school, because it means that we can do some good work. So thank you, Chair, for that. We also have on the employment front, one of the things that we have started doing is going to career fairs to introduce ourselves as an employer, because we are a great employer in the borough and we want residents to begin to see that. And in fact, I'm due to do a bit of work with our economic development team to see how we can expand that in the coming weeks. So that is something that we are doing. But in terms of do we have a youth policy, we don't currently, and it might be something that the committee want to think about recommending for next year's annual plan.
Thank you, Ms Kipping. That's certainly something we can maybe look at moving forward, and I am more than happy to be able to link you up with the school where I'm a governor. Sometimes it's really difficult to get into schools, as you say, and it does help if you know someone that knows someone. No one else had their hand up, and I've actually got some questions. Luckily, the good thing about going towards the end is a lot of the questions I had on my list have disappeared. So the first point that I've got was relating to, page 79, ECON 03. I think it's 03. Yes, it is. Review of advanced opportunities to improve conditional appearance of basically House of Fraser. It says it's complete, and it says the works are due to start in autumn 2024. I just question whether it can be complete if the works haven't actually started yet. So I don't know if someone wants to pick up on that or come back. It's just, we know that works haven't started yet, and that, so is it possible that that should be, I don't know, in progress or nearly finished or whatever? So just that's just I'm just reading through it. I don't know if you want to take that on board and just maybe come back to us on that one, or answer now. Okay, nodding your heads, that's fine. Page 82. 82. So fair trade. I know this is something that Councillor Bates was heavily involved in when I was portfolio holder. It does say here at the bottom of the end of year update, activity will continue through next year with the council promoting Fair Trade Fortnight in September. Council, I haven't seen any information come out about that, and Fair Trade Fortnight is next week, or starts next week from the 9th of September. So I'm just wondering if we have an update on that, because it says it's complete and it says we'll be doing something for the fortnight. But unless I might have missed it, it's very possible. But I'm just wondering if we've got something on that one. And then, I've got 83. What have I got on 83? Yeah, it might be me being dense, and it's very possible because it is 8 o'clock on a Wednesday evening. Page 83, there's a percentage, 93.1% of parking events. What does that actually mean? Does it relate to anything? Is that, it doesn't say what that actually means, so I'd be really interested to sort of get an idea of that one. And I think I've got one more, no, because the website's been covered as well. So no, that's my only 3 points.
Thank you, Chair. That's right. If you'll forgive me, I'll need to consult with Mr. Breeden and Mr. Walsh in relation to the first two around House of Fraser and Fair Trade Fortnight. You're right, given it is imminent, we would expect there should be some promotion around it, so I will find out and provide a written response. In relation to page 83 and the parking events, effectively what this is doing is this is comparing our pre-pandemic footfall, if you like, within the car parks to our current usage. And obviously this relates to last financial year because we're still collating the data for quarters 1 and 2 of the current financial year. But effectively what that is telling us is that the car park usage for last financial year is at 97% in comparison to the pre-pandemic levels of use within the car parks.
So is that a number of events, i.e. the number of people parking?
Indeed.
Okay. So it's not a value, it's just the number of people parking?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Assuming that no one, I'm in danger of saying any more questions because we're 8 o'clock and we've done this a long time. So has anyone, is it a short question?
I can wait till November when parking comes back, I think.
Okay, right. I have a whole pile of other questions, but I'm not going to. What I'll do is, if I email them over to the team, then thank you, Sarah. We will then collate all the questions that have been asked, and we can send them out as answers. Okay, so now the main event. Councillor McIntyre has been waiting. Item 7, Revenue Outturn Report 23-24.
Thank you, Chair. So I feel a little bit of a fraud after that build-up on the basis that this is a regurgitation of what we presented in the executive a few months ago. So apologies for the repetition. As everyone is aware, so I'm just going to introduce the revenue and the capital outturn report together as a little summary, but we'll do the two ones separately. Obviously, both reports are based on the budget set for 23-24. So they came and were approved in February 2023, so obviously quite a while ago now. They both reflect the full period up to the 31st of March 2024. But you have had the quarterly updates throughout that year. So the only thing that's new within these reports is obviously the addition of quarter 4. So as such, there shouldn't be much in there that you are that's new. Right, so for the revenue report, there's an underspend of just under 1 million, so 800,000 on the direct costs, but overall we're reporting an overspend of 2.4 million, which is pretty much the additional interest costs on the debt that we have to pay. That in itself comes to just over 3.5 million. The detail of variances by the services is at 1.3, which I don't intend to go through in detail, but it's there for your knowledge. And we also have the detail of the reserve movements at in 2.1. You'll be able to see that there is an additional transfer over the budget of just around £2 million, which again is that interest rate movements, but you can sort of see the ins and outs on at each line there. Obviously, whilst interest rates have maintained a higher rate than we were anticipating for longer, or were anticipated at the point of budget setting for longer, it's obviously been offset to a certain extent by our interest investments. So we've obviously benefited from that side. There's also 136,000 of underspend, which is carried forward to 24-25. That is basically finalising works or things that are already committed to that need to be carried forward. So it's more of a timing point. Are there any questions on the revenue outturn report?
Thank you. Has Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report again. So just to be clear, the transfer from reserves in the year that we're talking about that ended at the end of March, 6.1 million was transferred from the reserves, and all the reserves have already been internally borrowed. So that means there was an extra 6.1 million in external debt required to finance this. And external debt is also used to finance much of the capital programme, and I will come on to that. So if there was, say, there's 10 million is in the capital programme for this year, that could mean 15, 16 million extra added to the net borrowing, external borrowing. So if we went on at that rate, we've got about 50 million before we reach our maximum borrowing level. So we'd reach the maximum borrowing within 3 to 4 years. Is that the right way to look at it? If we continue at this rate? Thank you.
So I'm going to hand over to Ms Watson to say whether that's the right way to look at it. But in terms of the amount of reserves, I think we've known for a while that we only have 3-4 years worth of reserves left. And as you've seen in the MTFS that was approved February this year, and for the budget for this year, that we are running out of reserves, and that's just a fact of life. The more obviously that we need to utilise, obviously we can't replenish. So we do know that that we will. But you also see in the budget that we've set that we know that, and that we're having to make cuts. The budget that we're about to, or the process we're about to go through again now for 24, 20, no, what year are we doing? 25, 26, is also going to have to be a really quite, it's going to have to be a difficult process. And I think we all know the state of local government finances, which there simply isn't enough money to go around for all the services that we want to provide. So, yeah, in terms of the reserve situation, it is tight, and we are going to have to make cuts so that we have that we don't run out, essentially.
Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. Councillor Wilson. It's refreshing to be totally aligned with my portfolio holder around the financial situation of the council. It is, as you said, a use of reserves. We had budgeted to use a fair amount of our interest equalisation reserve to cover off those debt charges that were coming through. It has remained higher longer than was predicted by all the experts, and people who are paid a lot more money than me, working in central government, has said that they thought rates would come down in line with inflation. The lag has been a bit longer than they thought it would. I believe the Bank of England's line is it's the wrong sort of inflation that's come down, which is a bit of a leaves on the track type scenario. In terms of your question about the CFR, yes, you're quite right. We have internally borrowed, so if we're using those reserves, we have to replenish them. And this is where we get into the technicalities around revenue and capital financing. We can only borrow long term, and I mean potentially borrowing to finance our capital expenditure, hence the capital financing requirement. And I know you asked a question on that. We corrected the capital financing requirement in year during this last year because we hadn't previously included the internal borrowing in there. That was an error by the accounting team. We've corrected that, and we've now got that right. So it is about that 207, 210 where we are on it. So we have converted some for it, but the level of external borrowing depends on cash flow and where we are at the time. We'll only go out and convert the internal to external borrowing when we need to for cash flow purposes. Because obviously we don't want to incur too much cost unless we can find interest rates are converting round again. You say about the limits of our borrowing. The limits are engineered, and it's not the right term, but we work out what a capital financing requirement is. We then add on a prudent level to say this is where we're going to draw our operational boundary for debt and limit for borrowing. That can be adjusted in year. It can be adjusted by the council if we so need to go to do it. So suddenly, say for example, I'm not suggesting we go this way anywhere, a too good to be missed opportunity to develop an area and buy some land or something comes along and it would push us past our limit, we'd have to come back and ask to raise those limits and borrow. There is potentially no limit on what we can borrow, but other than the break that I, as the 151, will put on it, ensuring that all our borrowing is affordable, prudent and sustainable, and that's the maxim that we always use as per the guidance around it. So although it's my assessment of it, it would come back to a council decision if we wish to raise those limits, and we'll review them as we go along. But the level of borrowing we have is driven by the capital programme that the council approves. So as you say, if they approve a big capital programme and we can't fund it from grants or revenue income, it would be borrowing. Now, some of that borrowing can be done as an investor save. So if we know there's a return that comes in from putting the capital investment in, we can then mitigate that over the period of the asset life and say, this is the return on our investment. We will use that to finance the borrowing we have for the upfront capital payment. And again, that may mean when we relook at our capital programme for the 25-26 budget and beyond, we may have to say we need to lift our CFR, capital financial requirement, and our operational limits for debt. And that would have to come back. But again, it's a council decision based on the assessment from the 151 officer of whether it is prudent, sustainable and affordable going forward. So you will see there's other authorities of a similar size to us that are far more heavily indebted. I'm not suggesting we go that way because you can see what's happened to a near neighbour around those sort of things. So that gives me a little bit more strength to my, I don't think it's affordable, prudent or sustainable. We're going there. That's a discussion that I will have with the executive, with my portfolio holder first, to make sure that when we look at the budget build, we see what the impact is of any capital investment we're looking to do.
Great, thank you for that. If it's okay, I might ask a supplementary when we come round to the capital outturn part of it, but I didn't realise that if we got a too good to miss investment opportunity, we could borrow any amount. I think the council might have learned its lesson and its fingers burnt in the past about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowland, then Councillor Mears.
Can I just ask, from that outline, where does that put any moves towards London Road redevelopment? What will you be saying where that's going to happen, where it's going to come from and how it's going to be managed? Or will that be in abeyance till the financial circumstances change to some extent?
It's an excellent question, Councillor Rowland, one that I'm probably not qualified to answer currently. The Regeneration Working Group meets every month to talk about and look at potential options. And it's certainly a topic that we do challenge ourselves on. And Councillor Garrett is part of that, so is nodding his head. There is clearly a desire by the council to make sure that we resolve that whole, well, the town centre in general, including London Road Block. But we need to make sure that the plans that we commit to work and are phased in a way that makes sense and is managed from a capital point of view. So there's a lot of work being done on that, and that it will come to whichever the right forum is, whether it's executive or council, at a point in time when it's right. So I probably can't answer the exact question you've just asked because I don't have the information that would allow me to do that. But it's definitely a topic that's very clearly on the top of our agenda.
I can see Mr. Watson's fingers poised as well. Did you want to say something on that, Mr. Watson?
Only that to support Councillor McIntyre's there, it is something that will need to be considered on the light of the council's financial situation, what he can afford to do, potentially the return on the asset. And there will be a very big and hopefully resourced and worked out business case before we make any decision to commit money or dispose of assets.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Mears next.
Thank you, Chair. On page 95, 2.1, one of the reserves that saw the biggest movement was COMF. Would you just mind deconstructing the acronym for me?
You know it.
COMF relates to the pandemic, and it's the Control Outbreak Management Fund. So it was funding that was given by central government to local authorities to allow us to undertake initiatives and works to help with the nation's recovery from the pandemic.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question actually while we're on that page? About 2 lines up, it says environmental health brackets COVID. Should that still be COVID? Are we still getting money? Are we still spending stuff on COVID?
It is a movement from the reserve, so it was money that would have come in previously and we've been required to spend it. So again, relates similar to the COMF. Potentially, if we didn't spend it, somebody would ask for it back. I don't like giving money back to government.
Totally agree with that. Actually, while no one else had their hand up and we're on that area, I only had a couple of small ones, to be fair. Still on that page, 1.6, homeless prevention grant funding previously allocated to financing has now been included within service lines as a specific grant. This therefore shows as 326,000 adverse variance. What does that actually mean? Are we better off, worse off?
It's an accounting adjustment where we move it. Previously, it was budgeted as being below the line as general funding. We've now allocated it into the service area, so it's then directly applied against the housing service to help with homelessness prevention.
Thank you. And I've got one more question then, and it goes to page 96, joint waste solutions. Can we explain what provision to cover communications of round changes to residents costing £44,000 actually means?
I know a man who could, Councillor Rice. But in his absence, Mr. Stevens looks like he's poised to answer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. I'm not sure I can answer that question without checking with my colleagues, but I'm assuming that it is £44,000 of funding to ensure that we can make sure that residents are aware where we're changing rounds. So one of the intentions of the joint waste contract was to ensure that we had more efficient rounds, and that meant sometimes blurring the borough boundaries to take a single refuse collection vehicle into, as an example, Woking, because it was more effective to do that. I would believe that's what it is, but I will check and revert.
Okay, thank you. Oh, blimey. Okay, I'll give Councillor Noble a go and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just noticed that the figures in red and in brackets and the figures in black, it's not until you get to page 102 that actually says what the underspends and overspends are. I've got a financial background, so I'm pretty okay with it, but I'm sure that others don't necessarily understand. I just wonder if we could start putting that at the beginning of the report, please.
Mr. Watson would love to.
And I know it's not possible, but if we look at the annual plan we had earlier on, it was really nice and colourful and lots of graphs. I know it's not going to work with figures. I get it. If we make them look sexy in some way. Yeah, we don't want to spend more money on that. Okay, so Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just my final point on the revenue outturn. So in the table on 1.3, page 94, MRP, I know we've talked about this before, I don't want to go over that again, but minimum revenue provision. And I don't want to really ask about the figures, I want to just ask about the methodology, because I know you're still working on the figures. for this. So thank you to the Deputy Director who actually sent me the CIPRA Guide to Local Government Finance, which has been really useful, especially for things like this. So MRP is basically how councils and local authorities account for depreciation. So as you've explained before, you look at the lifetime of the asset and you make an allowance every year, which goes into the capital adjustment reserve, which is not usable. And then that, at the end of the lifetime of the asset, you can pay off the loan that you took out to finance it. So for things like vehicles, it's about 7 years or something. In IT equipment, it might be 5 years. But I remember for buildings, it's 50 years. So as you've explained all that to me already, and it's all really clear, but there's just one more thing. If the council purchases a building and it's already 50 years old, how do you work out the MRP for that? Do you assume it's going to be 100 years old by the time you've paid it off? Thank you.
I will go first, and Miss Walsford may wish to join in if you need to. It's almost right. We don't write it against the asset, so it's not depreciation as such. It's against the financing requirement. And there's a subtle difference is that we don't borrow in the same way that, say, a business would and say, this is borrowing for that asset. We borrow as a general financing requirement of the council. So we would link the MRP possibly to the life of the loan, where it is, and in terms of the long-term debt we've got, or we'd do it based on the notional asset that we use the money to purchase. So there is a link to the asset, but it's not a direct mortgage type. There's the asset, there's the loan. And we would write it down over the period like that. Now, obviously, we would do what we could to try and make it the most prudent number, because obviously this is a charge against a tax account every year that the taxpayer does, so it goes into our budget as a line we do there. What I can say, and Ms Walton may now come through and back it up, is that we've done a lot of work, and I say a lot of work, there's a lot of work gone in to understand that our MRP figure is right and we're making an adequate provision. Now that will obviously be tested by our external auditors when they do their value for money view on it, say, is our MRP right and things like that. And I'm meeting with them tomorrow, the new ones, and I will make sure that they have it on their radar of what to do to come and just confirm that we think our figure is the right amount. I do not believe we've underprovided over the last few years. I would suggest that maybe we slightly overprovided, but at that point in time we could decide, do we take a holiday, do we make it what they call, here we go, a voluntary revenue provision. There's a new one coming in from the outfield where we actually put more money side to help pay off the debt. And I will ask if Ms Walsford wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, what you said is fine. I think when the rules changed a few years ago, because CIPRA and the government were concerned that some councils weren't making a prudent provision, they tried to link the asset lives on MRP to together in a way. So they did come up with some maximum amounts for certain assets, but ultimately it's linked to how long the useful life is. So the minimum revenue provision is linked to the benefit that the council taxpayers are getting from that financing, essentially. So it's very similar to depreciation, but quite different at the same time, which I know is really confusing everybody, because it's quite a technical area. But yeah, happy to have further discussions on it. So we are, as Ms Watson said, we are finalising the minimum revenue provision figures, and I'm comfortable with where we've got at the moment. We just need our 23-24 accounts complete before we can be 100% certain and we know where we are.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you all. Did anyone else have a hand? No? No, I'm not imagining it. Oh, good. Right, in which case, thank you for that. So that now takes you to the final paper, the capital outturn, which I think you already did your preamble. Do you want to do some more?
I wouldn't want to let anyone down by not doing a little bit more about capital. Right, so the summary here, there's 15.9 million, it's just under 16 million pounds of spend was approved in the 23-24 budget, with 4.6 million spent. We reprofiled just under 6 million of that into the 24-25 budget, and an extra just under 3 million into the future years. Obviously, there's detail on the variances by service in the report, and a detailed schedule on the carry forwards in Appendix 1. I think, just a bit of a summary, obviously the 4.6 million out of 15.9 is quite a big underspend. There are all sorts of reasons for that. Some of it's timing, some of it is projects that that aren't relevant when it comes to it. Some of it is to do with finance and whether or not we want this to continue. So there are a number of different reasons. I think having now done the budget for this coming year, and you'll see in the future sort of quarterly reports that we do, it's a similar, although not quite such a big gap, but it's similar for this year where we are struggling to keep up with the capital programme that's set out. So it's a continual problem that I think everyone it gets sort of frustrated with, and it's something that I think we need to spend more time really understanding and making sure that we are budgeting for what we can spend, or at least being really transparent with what is being committed to and then not being able to be delivered, and for the reasons. So I just wanted to sort of set that out as a preamble at the beginning, because there is obviously quite a difference in that, but it's not necessarily something that's going to be in the past. I think it's something that is potentially a continuing theme.
Thank you. And I think, Councillor Wilson, do you want to have a follow-up? I'll give you that because you mentioned it in the last one.
Yeah, thanks. But talking about the capital expenditure being reprofiled, so yeah, 8.6 million, I think you said, was being reprofiled into this year, but over a year ago, 8.8 million was reprofiled from the 22-23 budget into the 23-24 budget. So yeah, only a small percentage of the capital budget seems to be getting achieved each year. But yeah, I'd asked about a couple of figures in the Prudential Indicators Survey on page 113. So that capital expenditure that we were talking about for 23-24, and as you said, it was 15.9 million budget originally, but it says in there the original budget was 2.5 million. That was only the new amount. That didn't include the 8.8 million that had been reprofiled. Is that the correct way of finding a number for that table? If that's okay, that's my first point about that table. Maybe I'll let the officers answer.
Yes, you're right, that is the new amount. These obviously were set when the budget was set in February, at which point we didn't have the 22-23 outturn and the reprofiling that came from that. So at the time, that would have been the correct budget to set for new schemes. It is right, because obviously anything that's reprofiled has always been previously approved by council as capital expenditure. So we're not introducing anything new to the programme other than that 2.539.
Great, thank you for that. The other number I wanted to see if you could verify on there. So it's the fourth row down, proportion of financing costs to net revenue stream, and the row above it tells you what the financing cost is. So if you like equations, you can actually work out what the net revenue stream is for each year, and that implies that the net revenue stream for 22-23 was 41 million. I don't think that can be right, can it?
I would probably argue that when we put proportion financing costs in, the 54 relates to 54%. So it would give me a figure of around about 15 million, 15.5 million, which is what our net revenue budget was, I think. If we go back to
for the previous year, in the first column.
Oh, the previous year, that was, yes, that looks like it probably is a erroneous figure. I think it's one that was quoted when we did the report. So we've just taken it from the previous report, but you're probably right, that's an erroneous figure. You'll be, again, roughly, in that case, probably about 40.45 rather than 0.15. I can see if we can go back and work it out and provide the correct figure in the first column.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. And obviously the second row, you've already said these figures were erroneous due to an error in the accounting team.
Yes, and if you look
207 million or to 210 million, something like that.
Yes, and if you look at the current budget profile we set in the medium-term financial strategy, I think we're using the 207 as this capital financing requirement.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Page 108. I tried to come up with something witty about the Camberley Theatre line, but I could only get as far as 2086 with Thunderbird's budget for it's 24-25. I think there are some forward slashes missing from those numbers, and some works completed in the year 2324. Thunderbirds was the best I could get to. I'm really sorry. I've let everyone down, haven't I? I should have come with a far better production. The amazing people at Camberley Theatre. I'm sorry, I'm not as funny as I could be tonight. I think the question was: are there a couple of slashes missing from that? I was trying to find a bit more humour there as well. My apologies, everyone. Although everyone's laughed, which is a good thing, at rather than with.
Cultural reference too old. Thunderbirds. Actually, while we're on that page, just a question, because I remember being in the chamber when we were discussing the tennis and netball courts going back. God knows how, that was a couple of years ago, wasn't it? But there's 5,217 there as an additional year-end rephasing. I thought the work had all been done, so what does that relate to?
We go?
I think that's probably a good idea.
It would be, I suggest, that it's retention that we're holding back, the standard process. So once we get it confirmed as being finished, we'll pay the retention.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. That's a really small point this time. I just want to go back, all the way back to the minutes and page 9. Because we looked at the Q3 capital outturn in the last meeting, and the capital spend so far after 3 quarters was 4.1 million, and we got to 4.6 million after 4 quarters, so only $500,000 was spent in that Q4. Is that correct? It's quite a lot less than every other quarter. Maybe it's seasonal or something.
Yes, that is the point. Obviously, the last quarter is January, February, March, and builders don't come out when it's cut. No, sorry, it's not fair to builders. But it is generally that sort of thing that the people are there aren't able to do the work or can't get it. So yeah.
Okay, but back in the minutes, it says there was a forecast underspend for the year of 7.6 million. Which means there was going to be a forecast spend of 8 million in the year. So it was forecast that nearly 4 million was going to be spent in that cold quarter.
I think we'd have to go back to the actual detail to better answer that. I mean, in terms of the forecast, that was forecast. What that 4 million underspend relates to that didn't go through in Q4, we'd need to go back to double check.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sorry, no. Brilliant. Thank you very much for all your help on those two reports. That takes us to the last item, which is the work programme, which I need to find. Bear with me 1 second. Thank you. 115, because I've been up at page 9. Right, there we go. Right, so work programme. We were talking about adding on the car parking, which was one of them, but over to you.
Yep, can I just quickly come on to that? So as Councillor Mears rightly pointed out, it was agreed at the last meeting to put it in for November. I checked the YouTube just to be completely sure. You'll notice committee members will have seen Councillor Richard Wilson's email about bringing a deep dive parking item for April. I understand that in terms of the some of the parking figures will be included in the portfolio holder reports for homes planning and enforcement in November. Would you be agreeable to do a deep dive item where, in effect, at this moment, it will effectively have the whole meeting to look at parking in April, and include some of those figures in the portfolio holder update report for November?
So are you proposing a smaller item in November to just review sort of 6 monthly and then bring it back in April again? Or
It would be included in the portfolio holder update report, and then something more in depth in April.
Yes, so just to clarify, so I was just talking to Mr. Stevens. So it would normally come with the portfolio holders report anyway, because parking would come as part of that. So there will be stats which will be 6 months, about 6 months. But then we can do what Mr. Scott suggested, which goes back to Councillor Wilson's point as well. We can also bring it to April, which would then give us a 12-month bite at the cherry as well. So actually, we're effectively getting 2 bites, but the first bite won't necessarily be as in-depth.
yeah, I think for me, 6 months was sort of what I was anticipating, just an overview of how it's going since the car parking charges were increased. I think a year is fairer to then consider the rest of the, give it a full time to settle, make the improvements, etc. I don't know if Councillor Wilson wants to add to that.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to take officer advice on what's the best way to do this, but I was thinking a whole year because it is seasonal again, parking, so we would be able to compare like with like. But also I'd like to know more than just usage. I'd like to know how the capital programme's being spent, because it's a lot of money. There's a lot of improvements going in. So is it costing what was forecast? Is the timescale going as forecast? And I'd like to know what the revenues are versus forecasts. And if we do that over a year, hopefully it's time to get enough data. Is April far enough after the end of the year to be able to get all the data together?
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Thank you, Councillor Mears. So what we are proposing, having spoken to Mr. Chinaya, who's looking after parking at the moment, and in consultation with Alan Ashby as portfolio holder, is that the portfolio holder report would provide data as current as we possibly can on everything that you proposed. So it would give an indication of revenue, expenditure and the project plan so far, and whether or not we're delivering on that in relation to the car parking strategy, and also in terms of usage of the car parks. But I agree that it would be more meaningful for us to provide at least 11 months worth of data in April, and then hopefully a projection through to the end of the financial year as best we can. So it is effectively 2 bites to the cherry. We wouldn't be restricting the information that we provide in November, and we could give a full picture in April.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds great to me. And apologies, I didn't realise that Councillor Mears had already requested for November. Thanks.
No problem. I think that covers everything off then, because I think it's obviously something we do want to look at. Now we have had a few reports which you've had to move around as well, which means it does look like the October and November meetings are going to be quite chunky, I think is fair to say. And that might change because it depends if the papers come. I'm quite I would love to see the heart of the arts, heritage and culture strategy come here before it goes to executive, which is one of the things I'm certainly trying to push for. But I think the rest of it looks okay, but we might have to move things around. At the risk of suggesting, does anyone else add anything to it? I'll ask the question. Councillor McIntyre.
I definitely don't want to add anything else to it. But in terms of your organising, I believe that the finance portfolio holder report is due in October. I believe. I might have this wrong, but I think it is. I won't be here. So if you want to grill me, I'd ask that it's moved to November, or I am sure I can ask the leader to sit in my place and smile sweetly. I'll leave it with you. I don't need an answer now.
Yeah, if you leave that with us, let's put the mic on first, it's probably the best thing to do, is probably myself and Councillor Noble will sit down with the officers and we'll try and figure out what the best thing is, because I'm conscious we've already moved some reports, so it is looking really busy in October, November. And just to clarify the point, the reason we're at this situation is because we had a general election, so we had to move the meetings. That's why you've got one in September, October and November. We're now in a situation where we're pushing them all through. So we've got the items we want to have. Let's see what we need to do as far as moving them around, if we need to move them around, and if not, we can have the pleasure of the leaders' company. Okay, no problem. Okay, thank you. Has anyone else got any other things they would like to add?
I think Bob.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't even looking your direction, Bob.
Apologies if it's not my place, but I think we did discuss at the chair's briefing that we were looking to bring the Q2 revenue and capital reports in October, so they could then get to executive in October.
Yes.
Because the idea is to try and make these reports relevant and timely enough to give yourselves as a committee and the executive the ability to take action to rectify anything coming out of those reports.
It's totally your place, because I completely forgot. So it's completely, so okay, we'll look at the complete work programme with all that in mind, and we will juggle things around. Brilliant, thank you. Has anyone got any other points? Speak now for the whole piece. In which case, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and a good rest of your evening.